February 1941. The Western Desert, Libya. A British general has just done something almost nobody in London believed was possible. With barely 40,000 exhausted men, he has destroyed an entire Italian army 5 times his size. Not defeated, destroyed. In 2 months, his forces have advanced 500 miles, smashed through fortress after fortress, and captured 130,000 prisoners. So many that at one point, British officers stopped counting and simply started measuring surrendered territory in acres. His name is Archibald Wavell. 4 months later, a telegram reaches his headquarters in Cairo. It does not congratulate him. It relieves him of command. The general who just delivered one of the most complete victories in the history of the British Army is about to be quietly swapped out of his job and shipped off to what Winston Churchill dismissively called the pagoda tree in India, while the desert he won gets handed to someone else to lose, then win back, then take full credit for. He has one eye, the other lost to a shell fragment at Ypres 25 years earlier, and a habit of saying almost nothing, even when the fate of an empire hangs on his answer. There is a particular kind of cruelty in how fast this turned. 4 months. That's the distance between the most one-sided victory any British general achieved in the entire war, and a telegram informing him it no longer mattered. Most commanders remembered as legends get years to build their reputation. Wavell built his in 9 weeks and lost it in less time than it takes to fully resupply an army. Almost nobody who was actually there disagreed about who deserved the credit for what happened next. Not the man who replaced him, who inherited a stabilized command and admitted it in writing. Not even Rommel, the general who eventually took the desert back, who studied Wavell's own writing closely enough to carry it into battle against him. The only person who never seemed willing to give Wavell his due was the one man whose opinion ended up mattering most. This is the story of Archibald Wavell. The general history remembers for his defeat, when the truth is a great deal more complicated and a great deal less fair. Wavell was never supposed to be remarkable. Born in 1883 into a military family, he moved through Winchester College and Sandhurst as a solid, unremarkable cadet. His own headmaster once wrote to his father that the boy had sufficient ability to make his way in other walks of life, a polite way of saying nobody expected much. He fought in the Boer War, then spent a year in Russia quietly learning the language and studying an army almost no British officer bothered to understand from the inside. In 1915, at the Second Battle of Ypres, a shell fragment tore through his face and took his left eye. He returned to duty wearing a glass eye and a habit of speaking so rarely that colleagues sometimes wondered if he'd heard the question at all, right up until he answered it, usually in one flat sentence, after a silence long enough to make the room uncomfortable. By 1939, he commanded one of the most demanding postings in the entire British military, Commander-in-Chief, Middle East, Egypt, Sudan, Palestine, the whole Eastern Mediterranean, a command so sprawling that some 40 different languages were spoken among the troops under him. Then Italy declared war in June 1940, and the math turned brutal. Wavell had 40,000 combat troops. Facing him across the Libyan border stood 200,000 Italian soldiers under Marshal Rodolfo Graziani, backed by another 250,000 scattered through Italian East Africa. On paper, resistance looked close to suicidal. You are Archibald Wavell. Churchill wants action. The newspapers want a victory. And every honest count of the enemy in front of you says that attacking a force 5 times your size, with an army this small, borders on madness by the ordinary rules of war. But you have studied this enemy longer than anyone in London bothered to. You know their supply line runs along a single exposed coastal road. You know their forward positions sit static, badly linked, badly commanded. You know numbers on a map mean nothing if the army holding them can't move, can't react, can't improvise. You have one shot and almost no reinforcements coming. In December 1940, Wavell launched Operation Compass, planned as a 5-day raid, nothing more. It became one of the most complete routes in modern warfare. British and Commonwealth forces under Lieutenant General Richard O'Connor tore through the Italian 10th Army, took Bardia, then Tobruk, then Benghazi, advancing 500 miles in 9 weeks. Entire Italian columns surrendered to a handful of armored cars and a few dozen exhausted infantrymen, sometimes without firing a shot. British troops joked afterward that they'd stopped measuring the campaign in miles and started measuring it in the acre, a running joke about how much ground and how many prisoners they were taking, almost faster than anyone could process them. At Beta Fam, a scratch force of roughly 3,000 British troops blocked the retreat of an entire Italian army corps, holding a desert crossroads against wave after wave of attempted breakout, destroying tank after tank until the surviving Italian commanders had no option left but surrender. By February, 130,000 Italian prisoners were in British hands, roughly 3 captured soldiers for every man in Wavell's entire attacking force. He had done it with nothing to spare, no reserves, no safety margin, just a correct read of the enemy, and the nerve to bet everything on being right. One decision at the height of the battle belonged to Wavell alone. When O'Connor's exhausted forces reached Beta Fam and found the retreating Italian army still ahead of them, junior commanders on the ground argued for caution. Rest the men, resupply, wait for the follow-up echelon. Wavell overruled the hesitation from Cairo, ordering the pursuit pressed immediately. No pause, no delay. It was his judgment that the Italian army had to be cut off before it could reorganize, whatever the cost to his own exhausted troops. That single order sealed the trap. The scratch force blocking the road held, the Italian army broke, and the encirclement that produced the bulk of those 130,000 prisoners happened because the general 400 miles away in Cairo refused to let his own field commanders slow down. If the story stopped here, Wavell would be a household name today. It doesn't stop here, because London had other plans for the army that had just won the desert. In February 1941, with O'Connor's forces close enough to potentially clear Libya entirely, Churchill ordered Wavell to halt and send his best troops to Greece, which was bracing for a German invasion. Wavell disagreed. He said so plainly. Then he obeyed anyway, because that is what a soldier under civilian command does, even when he can see exactly how the decision is going to backfire. It backfired within weeks. Stripped of the reserves it needed most, the depleted British line in Libya was hit by a German commander freshly landed with the first units of the Afrika Korps, Erwin Rommel. The line at El Agheila, thinly held after the Greek withdrawal, buckled almost immediately. By mid-April, Axis forces had driven the British all the way back to the Egyptian frontier, laying siege to Tobruk on the way through. Meanwhile, the Greek campaign Wavell had warned would fail was already failing. British troops were pushed off the mainland within weeks, forced onto Crete, then driven out of Crete too, after a brutal German airborne assault in May. Thousands of German paratroopers dropping directly onto defended airfields, absorbing horrific casualties in the first hours, but overwhelming the defenders through sheer weight of numbers within days. At nearly the same moment, a pro-Axis coup erupted in Iraq, threatening British oil interests and an RAF base at Habaniya, where a scratch force of training aircraft and barely armed instructors held off a besieging Iraqi force until reinforcements could arrive. Wavell, already stretched to breaking, had to peel off yet more troops to finish the job. Days later, Vichy French forces in Syria began supplying the Iraqi rebels, forcing him to open a fifth front entirely, sending men north into territory nominally held by France, fighting former allies in a campaign nobody back home fully understood was even happening. By May 1941, Wavell was running 5 simultaneous wars with no reserves left in hand: North Africa, Greece, Crete, Iraq, and Syria, all at once. One historian later called it possibly the most punishing situation any British commander faced in the entire war. A British diplomat who met with him during this stretch described him, in his own words, as looking like the picture of gloom. Wavell's mood only lifted when he joked that Churchill's increasingly sharp telegrams from London were useless because, as he put it, telegrams didn't help him beat the Germans. Churchill, watching from a war room 4,000 miles away, saw a string of retreats, not a general holding together an impossible position with almost nothing left to hold it with. When Wavell reported heavy but deliberate losses in a costly engagement in Italian Somaliland, Churchill pressed him hard for an explanation. Wavell's reply was pure Wavell. The men had fought hard and well, he said, and a big butcher's bill is not necessarily evidence of good tactics. Churchill was reportedly speechless with fury. Whatever trust remained between the two men curdled into something closer to permanent suspicion, right there, in a single sentence. If you're the kind of person who enjoys watching a good general get set up to fail by his own government, stay close, because it's about to happen to him twice. Churchill wanted a victory over the Germans specifically now, and he wanted it fast. In May 1941, he personally overruled Admiralty caution and sent a convoy of desperately needed tanks through the dangerous direct Mediterranean route instead of the safer, longer voyage around Africa. The gamble paid off. Only one ship lost, 238 tanks delivered. In Churchill's mind, he had now personally handed Wavell everything he needed. All that remained, he believed, was finishing the job. Wavell launched Operation Battleaxe in mid-June 1941 to relieve Tobruk and push Rommel back. It collapsed in 3 days. German 88mm guns, originally built as anti-aircraft weapons, repurposed by Rommel into some of the deadliest anti-tank guns of the war, sat dug into camouflaged positions and waited. When British Matilda and Crusader tanks rolled forward in staggered formation at dawn, the 88s opened up at ranges British commanders hadn't anticipated, and tank after tank brewed up in the open desert before their crews ever closed the distance. Disciplined panzer counterattacks then tore into what remained of the British armor, destroying 91 tanks against a fraction of that in Axis losses. On the third day, British forces narrowly avoided outright encirclement, pulling back just ahead of a closing German trap that could have cost them the entire attacking force rather than just its tanks. What Churchill never fully accounted for, and what Wavell couldn't say publicly, was that the force attempting Battleaxe hadn't recovered from Greece, Crete, Iraq, and Syria. There had been no real pause to rest exhausted crews or properly integrate tanks that had only just reached Egypt weeks earlier. Wavell was being asked to win a set-piece battle with an army that had spent the previous 4 months fighting everywhere except where Churchill now wanted a win. Most serious historical assessments since have judged Battleaxe's failure as less about Wavell's generalship and more about an impossible position forced on him from 4,000 miles away. At the time, none of that mattered. Churchill needed someone to blame, and he had already decided who. You are Wavell, at your house in Cairo. The morning after Battleaxe's failure is confirmed. Your chief of staff walks in before breakfast holding a telegram. It doesn't ask for an explanation. It informs you that you're being swapped with the Commander-in-Chief of India, Claude Auchinleck, a polite way of removing you without the embarrassment of an outright sacking. You could fight it. You could point to 5 simultaneous fronts, to the Greece diversion you warned against and were overruled on, to a battle you were ordered to fight with an army that never got the rest it needed. You could ask, at the very least, for leave to return home and make your case in person. Wavell requested exactly that. Churchill denied even that much, reportedly wary that Wavell's presence in London might become a rallying point for critics of the government's military record. Wavell accepted the swap without public complaint, packed his belongings and prepared for India, a posting Churchill breezily described as a chance to sit under the pagoda tree, as though Wavell were being sent on holiday rather than quietly discarded. Claude Auchinleck arrived in Cairo to take over a Middle East command that Wavell had, in every meaningful sense, already stabilized. Auchinleck himself, writing later about the handover, was strikingly generous about what he found. He said he was greatly impressed by the solid foundations laid by my predecessor, and that only after taking command did he fully grasp the vastness of the problems with which he had been confronted and the greatness of his achievements. That's one general, in writing, giving credit to the man history would mostly forget. Even Rommel rated Wavell highly despite having beaten him. Multiple historical accounts describe Rommel carrying an annotated translation of a book Wavell had written on generalship in his own pocket throughout the North African campaign, studying the mind of the very commander Churchill had just decided wasn't good enough. Wavell, meanwhile, reached India to find a defense establishment almost entirely unready for the war about to hit it. Obsolete aircraft, no modern tanks, barely 30 anti-aircraft guns in the whole theater. Within months, Japan entered the war, and Wavell found himself, once again, holding an under-equipped command directly in the path of a fast-moving enemy, this time losing Burma, a defeat that further cemented, unfairly, his reputation as a general associated with losses, rather than the man who had once annihilated an army 5 times his own size. Wavell's career didn't end in disgrace. In January 1943, after 2 years spent quietly rebuilding India's defenses, the same methodical way he'd rebuilt everything else in his career, he was promoted to Field Marshal, the highest rank the British Army could give. Later that year, he was appointed Viceroy, another enormous, under-resourced job, this time overseeing India through the devastating Bengal famine of 1943 and the final, volatile years before independence, working against London's reluctance at nearly every turn. In 1947, with independence finally close, he was replaced as Viceroy by Lord Mountbatten, another quiet exit from another thankless job that history would credit largely to whoever came next. It is worth pausing on just how unusual Wavell's entire career had become by this point. Most commanders remembered as legendary get to fight one campaign at a time, with something resembling proper preparation and a single, clearly defined enemy in front of them. Wavell spent nearly a decade being handed crisis after crisis, already halfway to collapse by the time responsibility for it landed on his desk. Through nearly all of it, the demands arriving from London outpaced whatever resources followed behind them. Wavell died in 1950, remembered publicly far less for the Desert Campaign that briefly made him one of the most celebrated commanders in the empire, and far more for the defeats that followed once London had already decided, 4 months into his greatest victory, that somebody else deserved the next chance. There's a specific irony in how completely that verdict has stuck. Ask most people today who won the Desert War in North Africa, and the name that comes back almost never Wavell's. It's Montgomery's, cemented over a year later at the far more famous Second Battle of El Alamein, fought by an entirely different commander on a different stretch of the same desert that Wavell had no part in planning and never lived to see credited to anyone but Montgomery. The general who inflicted the single most lopsided defeat of the entire campaign, against an enemy outnumbering him 5-1, has been almost written out of the story his own victory made possible. Every stratagem in this series comes back to the same principle. The most dangerous weapon in war isn't always the sharpest blade or the largest army. It's the story that gets remembered afterward, and who gets to tell it. Wavell's story is harder than most of the others we've covered, because there's no single villain to point to, no forged letter, no self-promoting rival building a myth in the press. What broke his command was quieter and more common than that. A government demanding victories on multiple fronts at once, overruling his judgment at the exact moments it mattered most, then measuring him against the outcome of decisions he'd argued against from the beginning. He won the most one-sided victory of the entire Desert War with almost nothing, and was blamed for a failure built entirely out of the impossible position London put him in. Auchinleck said as much in writing. Rommel said it too, in his own way, by carrying Wavell's words into battle against him. It was really only Churchill's version of the story, recorded loudest, remembered longest, that never gave Wavell the credit his own contemporaries, including the man who beat him, were willing to give. There's a specific kind of unfairness buried in that. It's one thing to lose to a better plan, or a better general. It's another thing entirely to be handed an impossible stack of overlapping crises by the very people who will later judge your performance, then measured against a standard that assumes you had the freedom of action you were never actually given. Wavell's real failure, if it can even be called that, was one of image rather than substance. He never learned to explain himself in the confident, quotable language political leaders and newspapers wanted to hear. And in a war increasingly fought as much through headlines as through battle lines, that turned out to matter more than almost anyone expected it would. Do you think Wavell should have pushed back harder against the Greece diversion, even knowing it meant defying Churchill directly? Or was quietly following orders and quietly absorbing the blame afterward the only real option a soldier under civilian command ever actually has? If this kind of hidden stratagem is your thing, hit like, drop a comment with your answer, and make sure you're subscribed, because history has no shortage of stories like this one, and we're only getting started. And if you want to tell us whose story we should dig up next, another commander history got wrong, or another deception that changed a war, leave it in the comments. We read every one.